It is early February in Florida, and the past few days have been cold. It has actually gotten below freezing at night, so I decided to visit Three Sisters Springs in Crystal River, Florida, to view the manatees that have gathered. And I was amazed at the numbers. A sign at the entrance indicated there were approximately 400 manatees in the vicinity of this cluster of three springs. The reason manatees gather here is for warmth. The water coming up from the springs is a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, while the water in the nearby Gulf was down to only 45 degrees Fahrenheit, given the recent cold snap. Manatees don't do well in water below 68 degrees, so when it gets cold in the winter, they tend to huddle close to the spring heads. During winter days, when it warms up, they'll often swim further away from the springs into the colder river or gulf in order to feast on seagrass, and then return to the springs to spend the night. But when this video was filmed, the air temperature was only 40 degrees, and the manatees were content to stay where they were, right next to the springs. You can see that many manatees are swimming out of a fast-flowing channel on the right. This channel or spring run leads to a cove that contains two more springs, which I'll show later in the video. So the water is flowing from the springs into the river, which eventually makes its way to the Gulf. Crystal River is about 6 miles from the Gulf, and when I filmed this, it was low tide. One of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service volunteers said that the manatees tend to exit this cove at low tide because they sense the water level is getting lower and want to avoid being trapped, although that does not happen here, as this is about as low as the water gets. And as we will see, there are a number of manatees that stayed in these springs within the cove. I walked along a boardwalk which gave me a different view of the same spring. Here you can see the clear fresh water gushing from the spring head and bubbling up at the surface. There is a cordoned off area near the spring head where most of the manatees are gathered. Around the edges are some snorkelers and kayakers. The manatees are amazingly calm and unbothered by people, but it is important to not touch them. Here is a view of the second of the three springs inside the cove I referred to earlier. The water in the center is quite deep, as it is here that it emerges from the earth. This water is normally crystal clear, but the large number of manatees moving about stirred up sediment from the bottom. West Indian manatees are found from the eastern United States all the way to Brazil and throughout the Caribbean. The ones found in Florida are considered a separate subspecies, and here they are at the northernmost part of their range. There are an estimated 10,000 manatees in Florida. They are considered an endangered species, and threats include habitat loss, pollution, and human activity, particularly being struck by fast-moving boats. Manatees have to come to the surface to breathe every 3 to 5 minutes when swimming, but can remain under for up to 20 minutes when resting. There is no seagrass growing in the immediate vicinity of the springs, hence there is no food for the manatees here. So they really are just resting in the warm water. There were some baby manatees present, which was nice to see. A little further along the boardwalk is the third spring. This one is smaller than the other two, and there were only a few manatees present next to it. You can see that one manatee has a floating contraption attached to it. This is a GPS tracking device. When a manatee is injured and goes into rehab, scientists attach this device via a cord around its tail. This allows them to track its movements once it is released back into the wild. After visiting Three Sisters Springs, I decided to visit a public park only half a mile away called Hunter Springs Park. and I'm really glad that I did. Here there is a spring just offshore in the Crystal River, and there were several dozen manatees resting in the shallows next to this spring. This was literally steps away from a public beach. Several people waded into the water for a better view. I decided this was too good of an opportunity to pass up, and so put on my wetsuit and went snorkeling right from the beach. The first thing I noticed is that the water felt really warm compared to the much colder air temperature. No wonder all the manatees were gathered at this particular spot. It was really neat to be able to snorkel with these gentle giants. I managed to get several videos of manatees coming to the surface for a breath of air. One thing that struck me is how small their eyes are, and they reportedly do have relatively poor eyesight. I think they chose to rest in the shallows on the edge of this spring rather than swimming in the deeper water, as this allowed them to conserve energy and only have to travel a few feet upwards to get a breath of air.